So I thought we'd go over a few forms. I'm gonna throw in a role play or two so that we can talk about it. It's not that my way is magic, but I've had people ask me before, can you tell me about how you present RECAD or how you present buyer's agency? So we're gonna break after every form, do a quick role play, and then get back into the next form if that works for everybody. But the first of which, we're gonna talk about the revised RECAD and the agency forms. And of course, we all know the real estate services disclosure we all refer to as RECAD. And it's a good point at one point. Just because we understand these acronyms doesn't mean your clients do. You know, God forbid, I mean, in the education world, I'm sitting in these meetings and they're talking about ELL and boom, these are real. I'm like, wait a minute, what the hell are you talking about? Because they assume they're in it, immersed in it every day. And just like we are, we're immersed in real estate every day. So don't take it for granted that your client knows for sure what you're talking about, especially when you refer to an acronym. So take time to explain things. I think we're all just gonna need to slow down just a tad. We're gonna have to up our transparency and we're gonna be great. I think it's gonna help people in this room because I'm worried about some of these people that have been doing stuff wrong for years, their continuation to do that. And as I've already talked before, and Gloria and I talked about it, you know, this is gonna be a new opportunity for testers to hit the market, to see if you're doing things right. People come in and see if you're not gonna RECAD them, or not gonna go over buyer side commission in your discussions with a potential buyer. Especially in our transient market, you're dealing with people that you've never met, they're coming into town, and so just back up, and if you do things right, there's never a problem. So if you just do it the right way from the onset, I think we're all gonna be great. You know, they've now come out with a real estate RECAD booklet. We're gonna talk about it briefly. I don't know if you've had a chance to read through it. There's some good discussion on limited consensual in here that helps explain that for folks. But that's an item that we can talk about. You know, the use of this form is mandatory and required by RECAD in this rule, meaning that you have to go through RECAD. It's not an option, it's not a suggestion, it's not the broker's rule. It's real estate law tells you in Alabama that we need to RECAD our folks. And it's really the right thing to do. We're required to provide real estate broker services disclosure to the consumer as soon as reasonably possible for his or her signature. Consumers are not required by law to sign the form, although we should encourage that it be signed. If the consumer declines to sign, the licensee shall make a note to this effect on the form. And my position has already been, if you got a person who's not willing to sign a RECAD, what's the chance they're gonna sign a purchase agreement? I mean, are they gonna be wasting your time? And you have to determine it. This is all, the whole buyer side is gonna be about determining your worth and demonstrating your worth to people. And that's where we're gonna have the discussion. I'm worth something. I'm really good at what I do. The new law dictates that we need to talk about compensation on my side before we go out this door and have that in writing. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's the buyer's agency form. But if people aren't willing to sign this, I write across it. I'm willing to sign, but I throw up a red flag. That's the first nail in the coffin if they're not even willing to do that. And I think the reason they wouldn't be willing to do that is if I didn't explain it well. And I start out with, this is not a contract. So the only real change is now down here in the lower corner is real estate broker compensation is not set by law or governed by any realtor association and is fully negotiable. That's nothing different than it's always been. It's always been negotiable. You know, I think I told you in a recent meeting that I was with a bunch of fraternity brothers playing golf and they're like, oh Kevin, your automatic 6% just went out the window, didn't it? Like, there was never an automatic 6%. It's always been negotiable. Where's my, Ashley, where'd you go?
Not far. She's out there loving.
All right. You know, we were talking about clients that fly into town, and mine just did.
Well, I got a few minutes.
Well, good. Have a seat. Let me steal this chair. Right here. Come through. Welcome, Nicole.
Sorry, sleep.
All right, I'm just going to go over the RECAD document with, we've got two sets of documents with Ashley, and just show you how I might present RECAD and see if any of this rings true with you all, and we can talk about it right afterwards. Okay, Ashley and I have been conversing via email and phone calls over the last few weeks. She's coming to town, wants to buy a home for her and her family, and this is our first chance to meet in person. So, and I always recommend these meetings start here. If somebody not willing to come in and have a meeting here, once again, that's a red flag. Do I ever go straight out to a property? Yes, I'm not gonna say I don't, but I always start here, and I tell them it's gonna be a time saver for both of us. So Ashley, hey, it's great to finally put a face with the name.
Yeah.
Welcome to LA.
Thanks.
Lower Alabama, we're glad you're here.
Did not land in California.
All right, we just talked about this. You weren't gonna grill me like a Johnson Brock, remember?
Surprise. Only because there's first.
All right, well, actually, there's a few things we need to go over before we get out of here. We've got some great houses lined up for you to see today, but I need to stay compliant with the law, and this is the right thing to do. It's just a matter of transparency, and I'm gonna go over a few forms with you. Would that be all right?
Sure.
Okay, we're gonna start with something that we call RECAD, which is real estate disclosure. This is not a contract. And where is my dog? You'll note at the very top, this is not a contract. And I want to point you right away to the bottom. We're going to talk about commission in the next form that we're going to discuss. Real estate commission has always been negotiable, and is today, and will always be negotiable. So I just want you to understand that. If you have a mindset in your head about standard commission, there's no such thing, okay?
All right.
So I'm going to go over the 4 ways that a real estate broker can behave in the state of Alabama. If at any point you have a question about this, and I'm going to leave you with a pamphlet that even goes into each one of these in more detail for you right now, but I'm just going to hit the highlights. I've been doing this for 25 years, so I'm going to go through this, and if you have any questions, just stop me right there and say, I don't understand that. What does that mean?
Okay.
Okay? Well, the 4 ways that a real estate broker can behave is as a single agent is the first of which means probably the most typical relationship you've ever thought of is you're coming to town, you came to town, you're dedicating your time to me, and I'm going to dedicate my time to you. And a single agent is why you're here. You are looking for professional advice to guide you through this process. Am I right?
Yeah.
Well, that's what a single agency does. As a matter of fact, the next form we're going to get into will make me your agent. But I want to discuss each one of these options to you, okay? So that's a single agent, the one you're most familiar with. Next is a sub-agency, where an agent acts with another agent on behalf of the client. While legal in Alabama violates our office policy, we don't act as sub-agents. At RE/MAX and Gulf Shores, we believe in working directly with the client. And that's what I'm prepared to do with you.
Okay.
All right, does that make sense? Next is a limited consensual dual agent, probably the most foreign concept that we're going to discuss. A limited consensual dual agency, as a matter of fact, 2 of the homes that we have set to see today are indeed RE/MAX and Gulf Shores listings. So if we go to that, and I need to become a limited consensual dual agent, means representing both parties. Now, it's something we need to talk about now in depth, because it happens 25% of the time with my company. 25% of the time, somebody with RE/MAX and Gulf Shores sells another RE/MAX and Gulf Shores listing. That is way, way above industry average. But it's way above because we have great agents. Great agents mean great listings. I'm really excited about the 2 houses we're going to see. If we decide we're interested in those houses, I'll need to transition. I'll be like Switzerland. I'll be neutral. I'll hold everything you tell me in confidence. If the seller tells me I really got to sell this house and I take 100 less, if they don't want me to share that with you, I won't. In my mind, it's the true definition of an arm's length transaction. I'm going to arm you with everything you need to know to make an offer, comps, recent sales, other things on the market, anything that you want to know. Then you're going to find out what you want to offer. I won't be telling you I would offer X, okay? Because I also represent the seller. Any questions on that?
So basically, I'm in charge of my own negotiations then?
Well, from a negotiation standpoint, but I'm the professional that's going to arm you with everything you do. The same thing I would look at if I was going to make an offer on a property. I'd want to know what's going on, how long it's been on the market, has it been reduced in the past, what have other homes in the same area sold for,
Okay.
things like that. And you can ask any question. I will be obligated to answer all those honestly. I just can't take it to the point where I'd be working against the seller, because the seller is represented by everybody in our company.
Okay.
Okay? And if that comes to it, we'll go over it again, but I just wanted you to understand that. Next is a transaction broker. A transaction broker is one of the assist one or more parties in the transaction. You know, if you had your mind set on a particular property and you were coming to town and said, Kevin, I only want to see 123 Main Street, and I already know about what I want to offer, you know, then we'll go look at the house together. But I'd really be less than this complete services. We've already gone to the point where I've shared with you properties electronically and so forth, which is still totally ethical because I haven't done anything but share that information with you today. But but we need to have this in place. So it talks about what you can expect from me and what I can expect from you when we talk about this. What I want you to know is that a transaction broker still has to be honest. It just doesn't have the loyalty factor. And as we talked about on the phone, you're looking for somebody to represent you. You're new to this area,
Correct.
and you want somebody. So that's what the single agency is all about. And we're gonna talk about that in just a second. So, and if up until the point that we sign the document, I am a transaction broker for you. Still honest and professional, but I wouldn't have that loyalty role involved there. Okay, does that all make sense?
Okay.
Now, this is one of the very first things we get audited on. When the real estate commission comes to our office and wants to talk about files, they're gonna say, hey, you met with Ashley on August 6th. Where's the recap that tells me that you ended up showing her properties and you recatted her first? You had this disclosure statement. So that's why we're doing it. So it calls for me to sign it, and it calls for you to sign the document, but I don't want you to do that until you're comfortable with everything I've just told you.
Okay.
Does all that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, we ready to get started?
Sure.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and sign here. I'm gonna sign my name and my license number here, and I'm gonna give you a copy of everything you signed today. So we'll make sure that we get that copy to you, probably electronically. We can give you a hard copy off the copy machine right now. Okay, does that all work for you?
Yep.
All right, well, I'm excited. The next stage we're gonna do is to make me that single agent. But right now, I want you to understand the RECAD process that we've gone over. I'm gonna leave you with this pamphlet. Maybe if you have a little trouble getting to sleep tonight, you can read some of that stuff in there. But it's all in there, and it's good stuff, and this is a transparent situation to let you understand you have options. All right?
Good.
Great. Any questions?
Nope.
Anybody else have any questions about the presentation of that? Charlie, you had something?
With repeat clients, do we recap them the same way every time? I mean, when do we sign anything? I mean, it suits the real estate commission, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I got people that are, working on their 12th deal with me right now.
Sure.
I mean, I'm gonna bring it up, and I'm gonna talk about it, but at that depth level, probably not. But it's still gonna be on file. It's not, a recap isn't good forever. If you wanna have it every time you're having a discussion about a new potential deal. Yeah. And if anybody's been a repeat customer, they love the way you work already, and they're not gonna have a problem. And don't hesitate to blame me, when a broker insists, and the law insists that we have to have this document in place. Okay, does everybody get it? Any questions? Tim?
Okay, between now and the 7/16, do we still use the existing docs? Are we okay with that?
I wouldn't. I don't know why you wouldn't use the new forms.
I mean, it's,
I
recap,
didn't-
the only
I didn't
difference
hear
is that
I didn't hear that.
Dominic said she didn't know why you wouldn't use the reform, but you're getting a little ahead of us. We're gonna talk about what we need to do between then and on the 17th, what we're gonna have to do
Okay.
different, so hold that thought, okay?
Okay.
Anybody else? All right, was that worth your time? I mean, it flows for me because 25 years and I recap everybody. I can't look you in the eye and say, where the hell's your recap, Rebecca, if I don't do it myself. So, I follow these rules and I make sure, and I've had people, if they refuse to sign at this point, that's a red flag for me. I've already said that. But let's go into a discussion of the buyer's agency, and then we'll meet back up with Ashley and see if she'll sign my buyer's agency.
Grab some lunch.
Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
Restrooms are around here to the left. Okay, so nothing's different there. Nothing's different at all in the recap. The buyer's agency agreement is most definitely different. We're gonna go over this form and talk about what's different, what's the same. Now we're talking about, there's Remax and Gulf Shores is the company where you're putting the, what was that, a yellow box, Tommy? That's hard to see.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, maybe it's the angle on that. So we're obviously gonna write the buyer's name in here. We're gonna put Remax and Gulf Shores as the company and your name as a broker or agent. And as buyer's exclusive agent for the purpose of assisting buyer in locating acceptable real property. And we're gonna talk about that. It has to have a term. Any contract has to have a term in order to be valid. It has to have a start date and an ending date. And here we're talking about, the start date is gonna be when you sign it. The termination is gonna have an expiration date here in line 2. Okay, here's a new change, the covered property. Right now, we write on page 2 of our buyer's agency what they're looking for. Single family home on the island, condo in Orange Beach. And then, of course, what's it say after that? Or any other real property. Okay, And there's only two kinds of property in the world, real and personal. So you've covered yourself from Huntsville to Dauphin Island if you say any other property. Okay, if you do, mark number 1, any purchase of real property, we're gonna fill out 4 and 5, a general description of what we're looking for, possible suitable properties. And this is a good time for you to reiterate what they're looking for, that you're on the same page with them. So I understand you're looking for an apartment in Foley. No, I'm looking for a condo in Orange Beach. Okay, well, we're gonna fill this out and make that. And then the general location and possible suitable properties include. And we're gonna talk about things that make, whether it's 3-car garage, whether it's a swimming pool, things like that. I don't recommend we get too in-depth, but at least you have something in writing that, hey, this is what we're looking for. All right? During the term of this agreement, buyer agents agrees to become well informed with the buyer's objectives, assist the buyer with qualifying for financing, locating and viewing suitable properties, negotiating favorable terms to the purchase. And you might want to hit on that, you know. You're gonna keep in mind, I tell people all the time, you don't know it, but you're hiring me for my negotiation skills. Because this is a business that negotiation plays a huge role. And I know that we met through my cousin, but I'm telling you, you're hiring me today because of my negotiation skills. You'll find that my real worth will come evident to you when we try to negotiate and get you the best price and terms. And especially if we have to deal with inspection items. The buyer's obligation. They're supposed to provide a general description, relevant personal and financial information to qualify buyer. Conducting good faith all negotiations for property exclusively through the buyer's agent. Once again, I remind them, you're dedicating your time to me, this dedicates my time to you. We're gonna work together as a team to fulfill this goal today. All right? Buyer represents and covenants that they are not currently under any representation. You know, this is the first question you're asking people anyway. Do you currently have an agent? Are you currently under a written agreement with another agent? Well, here they're gonna put in writing, that they are not, okay? And they're gonna initial that on paragraph 8. All right, now, this is the newest part about buyer's agency. In order to show you property, we have to talk about my worth to you, and under the new NAR rules, how we're going to handle that situation. So there are 3 options here for a buyer. Buyer's agent may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with the buyer. And we'll role play this in a second. So we'll just go over the form. The retainer fee, you can take a retainer, and that is non-refundable. You can say, I'm gonna ask $2,000 to go out and work with you today. All right, so we're non-refundable. Matter of fact, I'll take that in small bills right now if you don't mind. How often this is gonna come into play, but it might in a transaction scenario, which we'll get to. Or it can be a percentage of the gross purchase price at the time of closing, probably the most typical thing that the clients are gonna be familiar with. Or we can do a flat fee, or we can do other. Other is not a caveat for you to cover whatever the seller is gonna pay me. Or, 2 to 3%. You can't provide a range here. If you've got some other creative way that they've agreed to pay you, and you need to put that in other, but I can't imagine that happening all that often. Compensation shall also apply to any covered property contracted for within, that's 180 days if left blank. You're protected beyond the term of the agreement. After this agreement expires, you're protected for another 180 days. Once again, I think something can be very difficult to enforce, but if you talk about it now with them, then they're gonna see that that's where we're headed. All right? This, to me, is the best thing that they possibly put into the buyer's agency agreement.
I agree.
The buyer's agent is directed by buyer to first seek compensation from the seller and/or listing agent. Any compensation paid through the transaction will be credited towards the compensation owed as described above in this paragraph. However, buyer expressly acknowledges they shall remain liable to the buyer's agent for any remainder of the compensation due to buyer's agent under the agreement, notwithstanding any non-refundable retainer. Are we okay with that? That is the paragraph that's gonna put this buyer most at ease, in my opinion. Failure to close, notwithstanding any non-refundable retainer, should a seller fail to close with no fault on the part of the buyer, payable to Paragraph 9 shall be waived. If buyer is at fault, the full compensation will be due and payable. You have a buyer walk, they still owe you their fee. Good luck collecting that too. Limited consensual dual agents. You know, we talked about it in RECAD with the role play. And we're gonna talk about it again when we do this here, that if you're interested in RE/MAX Golf Service listing, I need to know that you're authorizing that to become a situation. Another help when you're writing that contract and you're going through the RECAD stage and you're marking limited consensual and they say, well, what's this? Well, I told you, this is the RE/MAX Golf, this is one of Chuck Norwood's listings. I think it's a great property, I think you made a great decision. But you did agree that we would go to a limited consensual role. The buyer's identity, the buyer's agent does or does not have permission to disclose the buyer's identity to all property owners and other third parties. You know, Dominic and I have been talking about this. Obviously, they're gonna be signing the purchase agreement. I think in my opinion, this excludes the purchase agreement, and certainly once you're under contract, it excludes sharing their name with title agents and settlement agents and so forth. I don't know if anybody has a different opinion on that, what the real purpose of this is.
There's obviously a reason they put that in there, but I don't know what it was. So.
Anybody have any insight on that?
I would think you
Reach out
would,
directly,
I'm sorry?
so they don't reach out directly to each other? I don't know.
I don't know what the reason for this is. Buyer's agent does or does not have permission. I'm gonna be fine with it either way, but I'm gonna certainly let them know that.
Well, I recently had one, the buyers did not want the seller to know who was making the offer. We put it in
So how did you do that?
we put it in it was in an LLC, and they did not want to, release the name, and the title company was informed not to let until closing.
So what was Morgan Freeman buying?
Pardon?
Morgan Freeman, that Morgan Freeman?
Yeah.
Shawshank LLC? So how'd they sign it?
Yeah, they signed it, and you probably couldn't even read the signature of it,
Well, they
but
did-
it was in the LLC.
They did a wet signature.
Yes.
Okay, Andrew Hart?
On number 10,
Yes, sir?
I mean, how are you gonna handle that when they say, so you're telling me that if I don't qualify for my loan in the last minute, I still owe you 3% commission?
I don't think that's the fault of the buyer. Well, unless they,
I mean, but
It's a non-refundable.
but who's to say what the fault is of the buyer? It was just if they walk away?
yeah, I would think if they,
I think if the purchase agreement, if it falls under the default paragraph of the purchase agreement. But I mean, like, if you have a mortgage contingency, that's not default.
but that does say retainer fee, non-refundable.
That says
Yeah, if you take a
that's
retainer,
what you did,
that's
that's what you
non-refundable.
selected. Go back to the slide previous.
Or what if it's a due diligence issue and they just choose not to accept the
That's not
property?
default.
Right.
that's their
Okay.
contractual level.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think basically, as long as they don't default on the purchase agreement itself.
Yeah, if it's a clear buyer's default, and
When you start, it ends up.
there's gonna be an earnest money dispute probably, or the seller's gonna, or the buyer's gonna, especially if the buyer agrees to relinquish their, earnest money, and they change their mind, they're walking. And so, well, you got another contract too that you said you'd do, you said you'd pay me 2.5% of the purchase price we were on the contract for. Guys, you know, the enforcement of this, Andrew, I think is really difficult.
Because you would have to do the suing as the broker.
Yep.
And how
In any of
likely
these
is that gonna
situations-
happen?
In any of these situations we're gonna talk about, if the buyer doesn't pay you when they should have, your recourse is gonna be to sue them.
And that's gonna cost you more, and have too much headache, so.
Well, not with the properties you deal with, Cass. $3 and $4 million properties, should be damn well worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, item 15, assignment by buyer, just because they assign it doesn't remove them from the rights. As Asinor, they still are gonna owe you under the rights of this agreement.
Kevin, speaking of that, if they do assign to an LLC or they add a wife, or, I mean, I know when we add parties, we always have to recap them as well. But as far as, do we need to do an addendum now to this document if they decide to transfer the rights to LLC?
It says that, I mean, they signed something here that says by assigning, they're not removed from this obligation to pay you. I think it would be a nice step to take it, and then let's go ahead and reiterate the buyer's agent compensation under the new S&E. All right. Brokerage services disclosure, buyer acknowledges that the buyer's agent and/or company has provided them with a signed copy of the real estate brokerage services disclosure, which is required by the Alabama Real Estate Commission. Okay, they're gonna reiterate that you did recant them at this point in time by signing this document. Okay? And it's calling for, of course, the company name, your buyer's agent signature, and, of course, the buyer's signatures. Ashley,
Hey, Kevin,
yo,
back up to that one,
to what one?
that one right there. Why, would it confuse the client? I never have thought of this, but when we refer to it as real estate brokerage services disclosure, technically it's real estate consumers agency. That's how the RECAD disclosure. So it's not worded just like the RECAD.
Tell you talking about was.
Real estate consumer
The acronym
agency disclosure.
Real estate brokerage services disclosure.
They've renamed it.
Real estate brokerage
Okay.
services disclosure. It's the same as the
Okay.
new recant has the title.
Kevin,
Yes, ma'am.
I want to, and you may be getting into it when you get in with it, Ashley, but before you even get in on this, do you have sort of an abbreviated, this is why this is happening?
Yeah, I think we're gonna talk about that right now. How about that? Okay, Ashley, are you ready? To make me your single agent?
Sure.
Is this worthwhile, the role play?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. I'm not gonna sit there and bore you with the stuff if you don't think it's helpful. All right. So Ashley, you went ahead and signed the disclosure document right there?
Sure.
Great, thank you. Now, you may have heard, unless you're living in a cave somewhere, about this whole NAR lawsuit, National Association of Realtors lawsuit that went down about commission and how it's paid. And that's created some changes in our industry. In my mind, it hasn't created very many changes at all because commission's always been negotiable. But now it becomes part of the buyer's agency agreement, and that's what we're gonna go over now. This is what's gonna make me your agent and create that fiduciary and loyalty factor that we talked about in the disclosure document, okay?
Okay.
So if you're comfortable with that, I've already started to fill it out. I've got your name here, I've got the company name, and I've got my name. And what this does, if we execute this document and you're comfortable with it, it's gonna make me your agent, your exclusive agent for the purpose of assisting you in locating acceptable real properties for purchase. Okay, and we're gonna talk about those real properties in just a second. But this does just what we talked about on the phone. You don't know anything about the area, first time you're buying a house, this is important, you have a professional, and this document is gonna make me your professional.
Okay.
And once again, it's gonna obligate you to me as well, okay? I'm dedicating a lot of time here to you. Matter of fact, we spend 3 times as much time with buyers as we do sellers, just because it's a process, and we're not gonna quit looking until we find the perfect property for you. So that's what this document's gonna do, and I'm gonna go over it once again, at any point in time, something doesn't make sense, or I went too fast, holler at me. I do this every day, you've never done it. So I'm comfortable with going at your pace, understand?
Sure.
Great, okay, so, and you're gonna get a copy of this, you're welcome to read it. Matter of fact, if you're uncomfortable at the end, and you wanna take 15 minutes to read through the whole thing, then I'll grab a cup of coffee and we can do that too, okay? What's important here is that you fully understand what we're talking about. I know you're excited as I am to get out and see these houses, but this is another required step by law.
Okay.
My license is in jeopardy if we don't go ahead and fill out these documents, okay?
Sure.
Great, okay, well, the term of this agreement, I've set it for 6 months out. I don't think it'll take nearly that long to find you a document, to find you the proper property. But I'm gonna go ahead and write that in there if you're comfortable with that. If not, we can talk about that too.
Yeah, sure. We can tell them about this.
Well, this, I will remain your buyer's agent even though we're not sitting face to face. You're gonna be signing purchase agreements probably remotely. We're gonna be negotiating remotely and all those things. But this makes me your agent. We'll have it on file and you'll have a copy of it. All right? Okay, let's talk about, we've been talking about how you're looking for a minimum 3-bedroom. You want to be in the Gulf Shore City School District. So we're taking that into account. On item 3, we can mark this just for any property in case we find anything, we totally change gears, or if you want, we can specifically identify what it is that you're looking for.
Okay.
So you seem really clear in what you're hunting, but I can tell you, when people come to the island for the first time, you have no idea how many times they change gears and maybe say, well, I don't want a condo after all. Or, you know, that maybe I do want a condo, this house is too much, all these yards and everything is too much, single mom, crazy. So I get that. So we're gonna go ahead and write in, and if we want to, we can talking about the descriptions that you're looking for. And it would really be a good idea to reiterate, so I'm laser focused for you. Let's talk about what you're looking for in a house, as far as generic terms, bedrooms, baths, location, things like that. Tell me what it is that you're really hoping for.
Fixer upper,
Okay?
on the water,
I'll remember this, I won't write it down.
less than 30.
Just kidding.
Yay!
I'm sorry?
Said fixer upper on the water, less than 300,000.
So, when you say water, puddles count, I think?
Depends on the size of the bubble.
Well, if your expectations are here and your budget is here, we gotta correct one or the other. But I'm gonna go ahead and make note of all those things, and a couple of those properties we talked about, but I mean, they are fixer uppers. Right? You know what I mean? Best thing happened to this place would be a match, I'm telling you. But great, and you really wanna stay in the Gulf Shores area, I understand.
Absolutely.
All right, so I've got all that written down, and that's gonna be part of our agreement. You know, we're gonna talk briefly in paragraph 6. I'm gonna put you in the right document, huh? Where'd you go? Dominic, you gave me copies of everything, right?
I did. 2.
Here we go. All right. Paragraph 6, buyer's agent services. Tells you that I'm gonna become well-informed, this is why we're having this discussion, we've had it over the last couple of weeks via emails on what you're looking for, so I think I have a pretty good handle on that. And when it comes down to it, you told me you're gonna be probably putting down about 20%, and looking to borrow the rest.
Sure.
I'm gonna help you with that. I've got 2 or 3 mortgage companies that are local. I really recommend that you pick a local mortgage broker, just because of all the nuances of being waterfront, being in a flood zone. You know, my biggest fear is when clients tell me that my cousin in Huntsville is a mortgage broker and he can handle this. Or, God forbid, he's in another state, but he's licensed in Alabama. We end up salvaging those situations in the 11th hour so many times because it's a really unique place you're buying in. So I'm gonna give you some names of some mortgage companies when it comes to that, okay?
Sure.
Then I'm gonna help you locate and view these suitable properties. We've got 6 to see today, as a matter of fact. And I'm gonna help you negotiate. You may not know it right now, but the reason you're gonna be hiring me is because I'm a great negotiator. I really have done this for so many years. I'm respected in the industry, and when it comes time to negotiate, I can really help save you some money. Because you spending too much for a property is not acceptable. Okay?
Sure.
All right. I'm gonna assist you in all the tasks, fulfilling the obligations. Just when we go under contract, really starts the deal. We're gonna be talking about inspections and appraisers and termites and everything else that we may need to talk about in the buying process. So just because we sign a purchase agreement doesn't mean I just sit around and wait for the day of closing to come get my check. We're gonna work hard for you, even harder after we go under contract with somebody. Okay? Now the buyer's obligations. You're gonna tell me what you're looking for, and you're gonna be honest with me and candid. That's the biggest thing I want when we're out showing property is candor. I don't know in any of these houses. You are not gonna hurt my feelings. If you wanna say, Kevin, yuck, what were we thinking? And we're not gonna spend 30 minutes in that house. We'll leave a business card, we'll be courteous and maintain the showing, but then we're gonna move on. Okay? So I need that back and forth. I need candor. I've got a house. We're trying to find you one. All right? Good faith. You're gonna conduct good faith on negotiations. We're gonna talk about what we're gonna offer. We're gonna talk about what we're gonna counter offer. We're gonna talk about what we're gonna ask for in inspections and all those things during the process. Once again, I'm obligating my time to you, and I'm asking you to obligate your time to me. You dedicate your time to me. If we take a break later today and you stop in an open house, I'm just gonna ask you to start the conversation with, just so you know, I'm working with Kevin Corcoran over at RE/MAX and Gulf Shores. Any agent worth their salt is gonna respect that. And they'll still be courteous and honest and answer your questions, but they'll know you have representation, okay? It should be the first question they ask you, but a lot of them don't. All right? So, let me go into, at any point stop me, but this is the new and matter of fact, that's what we're talking about right now. The paragraph, the end of paragraph 8, the top of page 2, it says that you are currently not working. And we've already had this discussion, but you are not working with any other agent right now. You don't have any written agreement with anybody else. So we're gonna initial here that, that's the case. You're not working with anybody. When we sign this, you'll be working with me. Okay? So compensation, this is the newest change as a result of that lawsuit that we talked about. We now have to demonstrate our worth, talk about my worth to you and what value I bring to the table, and then you can pick a compensation level that you'll be paying me directly if we don't get that money elsewhere. Okay? So the first we could do is a retainers fee. You can pay me a retainer. Personally, that's not my business plan. I don't work off retainers. If we don't find something for you, I don't think I should be paid. Okay? So another option is a flat fee. There is a percentage of the gross purchase price. Probably that which you're most familiar with. You know, the old monikers of the 6% commission and being split, things of that nature. That's probably the most typical. And in fact, it's the one I'm gonna recommend that we write in here a percentage of the purchase price. Another is a flat fee. If we decided on just a flat dollar amount, then that would be the case. Okay, now I'm not even gonna ask you to pick one of those yet until I explain a little bit more about this situation. And I'm gonna direct you down that the compensation shall also apply to any covered property contracted at the end of our term. If you go in and pick one of those houses and a covered property that we've talked about, within 6 months, I'll still be owed this fee because I will have been what's considered the procuring cause to help you locate that property. Just protection for me going beyond the end of the term. Okay, but now here's right at the end, right before paragraph 10, here's the paragraph I want to talk to you about. We're going to spend a little time on this, okay? The buyer's agent is directed by buyer, you, to first seek compensation from the seller and or the listing agent. Okay, hopefully we find a property that is the case, and then that comes off of the fee that we're going to talk about. Okay, that's going to come off of that number, and the seller or the listing agent is going to pay that. That's the most traditional situation. That's the way it's been for the 25 years I've been in the business. And right now we're seeing a lot of sellers who are willing to provide a seller concession in order to do that. And I'm not going to filter the properties based on what they're paying or not paying. We can talk about it when it comes time, and we're going to reiterate it in the purchase agreement. We're expecting them to pay my fee up to a certain amount. All right? But this is the newest part, and people are used to working with buyer's agents, knowing all the compensation is going to come from the seller. That's what's changed in this whole lawsuit scenario. Okay? So the buyer expressly acknowledges they shall remain liable to the buyer's agent, me, for any remainder of the compensation due. If we agree on a number and it turns out the seller's only willing to pay half of that, you'd be obligated for the other half. But I think I'm going to demonstrate that worth to you when it's time to negotiate. We're going to do our best to get you the lowest price possible. All right? So if there's a failure to close, and now I think really now is the time that we can talk about this. Which of these are you most comfortable with? The retainer, the percentage of gross purchase price, or a flat fee?
Percentage, seems fair.
Okay,
I don't wanna pay it though.
well, I understand that, but I gotta tell you, all the money comes from you anyway. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there are no
Yeah.
proceeds unless you bring a check or certified funds and a mortgage
All right then.
to the property. You know, my business plan is based on 3%. I like to work at a 3% level. There's lots of people who have helped us set up these houses that we're gonna see today. You know, my wife Dominique, who set out this wonderful showing agenda and made all these appointments for us. All these people, you know, nobody's working for free here. So if you are comfortable, I'd like to recommend a 3% fee at this point. And we're gonna do our very best to get that from the seller.
Sounds good.
And if at any point we get into a situation, I'm not gonna let a few you know, small points get in the way of you getting the house you want. We can talk about that at the time. But this allows me, if we wrote in a lower number and the seller was offering more, I couldn't accept that more unless we went back and amend this agreement. So if you're comfortable, I'd like to write in 3% and move on with the rest of the agreement.
Sure.
Thank you. That's awesome. And I think I'm gonna continue to demonstrate why I'm worth that 3% to you. All right, if there's a failure to close, if something happens, I mean, we're not going the retainer route, but if something happens where you're at fault, you don't close, you walk away from the deal, I put in all this work to happen, you'll still be obligated to pay that fee to me. Okay? But,
This is where you say no.
Sure, right.
We need some fighting there.
I mean, we're gonna write a contract that is gonna have inspection contingencies, financing contingencies that we've talked about. If any of those contingencies, are met and you decide to not move forward, that's not what this is about.
Okay.
This is about, if you clearly are at fault and you say, screw this, I ain't doing it, and we've done all this work, we're gonna talk about my fee at that point coming from you.
Okay.
Okay? Limited consensual dual agency, we talked about this in recap. I want to know that this paragraph, you have to allow me to pursue that. And with two of the houses, we're gonna see a remix of Gulf Shores. Otherwise, I'd have to transition to a transaction broker, which would be a lesser level of services from this standpoint. I'll still work as hard as I can for you up until the point where it contradicts working for the seller. So if you're comfortable with that, I'd like to mark that you will authorize me to be act as a limited consensual dual agent.
Sure.
Should that happen. All right, next is disclosure of your identity. Sometimes people are not willing to disclose their identity. Now, you're not in an LLC, you're not, I mean, we're gonna sign a purchase agreement. So, I mean, we're gonna see your name on the contract. But if there's any reason you don't want that disclosed, we need to talk about that at this point. But I'd like you to authorize, that I have permission to disclose your identity to all property owners.
Sure.
Okay? Sometimes it's gonna help. With your situation, single mom moving to town, you know, it may play well in our favor if we explain that to, find an empathetic, seller that may wanna work with you. Can't? Oh, I can't say single mom.
No.
Right. All right.
It's discrimination.
Well, they're gonna Google you. And I want you to change your Facebook page to single mom need help. I can't say that either, Bruce.
Facebook, I don't know.
Well, I can't.
Not everybody's a place, so you can't.
All right. Thank you. This is my first time through this form with a client, so that's a good point, Bruce, I appreciate it. The buyer's agent will not obtain other product or services from outside sources unless you agree in writing for me to do that, okay? If you assign this, if something changes, you were to assign this or add somebody else onto the purchase agreement. You know, if you have somebody that's gonna help you with that, or you're gonna take a co-title or something like that, changing this assignment doesn't remove your obligation to get me paid. Okay? The rest of it is pretty simple, not all of this has changed. Attorney's fees in case there's a litigation. The parties agree that costs are reasonable shall be awarded to the prevailing party if there's any time there's a disagreement that occurs. This is the entire agreement that we're talking about. Paragraph 19 says that you acknowledge that you did sign a real estate broker disclosure services form with me, and that's just gonna reiterate that now. Once again, that's by law that I did that. Now, actually, I went over this fast, and I do this all the time. Any questions you have throughout this whole buyer's agency?
No, that's what I'm paying you the 3% for.
Yes, ma'am, and like I said, first and foremost, we're gonna go after the seller to pay those funds.
Sounds good.
And really, the number of listings that I've done recently since this rule's in place, I've had sellers very willing to provide a concession, because they know without a buyer, nothing happens. And all the money in the end is gonna come from you and your mortgage company. All right?
Sounds
Well,
good.
great, if you wanna sign here, then, nothing holding us back except getting in the truck and seeing some progress.
Can I ask a question for Ashley?
Sure.
Bring it.
What if we get to a house, Kevin, and this contract says 3%, but they're only offering you 2%? Do I still owe you 1% on top of the 2?
Indeed you would, but the first recourse that I would make is that I would, put it into a purchase agreement that we're expecting 3%.
Okay.
And if it comes down to that, we'll talk about it. Like I said, I'm not gonna let, my feet get in the way of getting you the right home, all right? But by placing it at 3% like we've done, which is probably the most we're gonna see out there, then I'm covered, I'm willing to accept, and I'm able then to accept that. And if not, if it's a different number, we can always amend this document, but let's get to it now. Candy?
So are we working on an amendment for this document, or do we need to just kind of put one together ourselves?
An amendment for how to,
Yeah, and
I think it's gonna be a lot like a listing change agreement.
Yeah, it's just gonna be
a-
a modification to your
Yeah.
buyer's agency agreement.
So then you just say that the seller's willing to pay a commission of 2.5%, and that relieves the buyer of the other, you're gonna.
Yeah.
Well-
I'm just thinking we need some
100%.
consistency, you know, that's why I asked if it was something.
Yes, we'll
new.
have a form for that.
Okay, thank you.
You know, like again, like Kevin said, it'll be a lot like the listing change agreement. It'll be a very simple, probably just a copy and paste of the little paragraph, whatever that is, that has the compensation where you can just amend it.
Tommy, I'll give you a copy. This is a Florida one.
Yeah, I have that
You've
one.
got that one.
Where are our Florida agents? Have y'all watched these webinars
Oh, yes.
that, what's her name, Tanisha does?
Yeah.
Wow.
Joanna.
I'm getting ready to watch,
Memorialized it.
I'm doing another one today at 12.
Yeah.
Because Florida's doing it differently.
Yeah.
Florida does address buyer's agency in your listing agreement, whereas Baldwin Realtors has stricken it entirely. There's no reference to that. And we're gonna talk about listing agreements, next week.
I do have that, I'm gonna set that up at 12. For
the NAR
If
one?
anybody wants to come and watch that, yeah. But, Kevin, I wanted to mention that I did show a property in Florida this past, week. There was a 1.5% commission on it, and I asked the agent, I said, is this why they did that? And I think we're gonna see that. You know, a lot of sellers, and I've heard, you know, people say, well, I don't wanna pay real estate. I mean, and I think we're gonna see more of that with sellers with a lesser commission.
I've never seen
We just need to be ready for that.
You need to ask for more in there.
Need to ask for more in the purchase agreement. Is it in that purchase agreement to ask for more?
Oh,
It's in ours.
It is, okay, I haven't
No,
studied our
no.
new purchase agreements.
Yeah, but for the first time ever, we're gonna be writing in commission, I think, to every purchase agreement, don't you, Chuck? I mean, because you gotta remember, when we talk about the listing agreement next week, it says, under seller concessions, is seller
Maybe.
authorizes listing agent to advertise that seller may be willing to consider seller concessions up to the number you're gonna write in there. So it doesn't say, just because if an agent tells you on their website, my seller said he's willing to pay 3%, you gotta still put it in the contract, because it says may. Their listing agreement says may be willing to offer seller concessions up to this amount. I think we're gonna be writing commission in every offer. Or seller concessions in every offer backed up by your buyer's agency agreement. It also says in that listing agreement that it can't be limited to buyer's agent compensation. They can't say that in your listing agreement, you can't write in you're willing to pay the buyer's agent 3%. It can't be limited to that. Yes, ma'am.
I listened to Brent Lancaster last week here at the office, where he was going through multiple questions, and I wrote this down, and I want to say, and I actually think Ashley you signed it up for me under Dominique, so I never got like the follow-up slides, or not, Veda did it for me, my bad. I never got any like the follow-up slides for it, but I thought I'd written down that you can list a concession amount from the seller in MLS, you just can't you can't say what it's for. But so for example, if it did include buyer broker compensation of 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever it was, plus they were willing to give $5,000 towards closing costs, you could lump that total together and say seller concessions are being offered at blank dollars. Did you understand that, or does anybody understand that?
That's what I understood too. You just can't say buyer's agent, you can't use the word commission or compensation.
Yeah, but I mean, I would add to the back of that with an acceptable offer. I mean, that's redundant, but of course,
So speaking of that,
but if somebody comes back to you and says, hey, you're willing to do 10 grand, yeah, full price we were.
yeah, right. And I do that in listings already, but I think you have to go one step further, acceptable to seller. I had a Navy code one time where we said that we would pay, I forget what it was, a portion of the assessment provided, or pay the assessment provided that the offer was acceptable to the seller. So when we got ratified, the agent never asked for the concession at all, or towards the assessment. Well, once we got ratified, she sent me an addendum and said, well, you said if we had an acceptable offer, that the seller would pay this amount. And we went round and round about it, and we finally worked it out. But it just got me thinking that it needs
I
to
think by
say.
your seller signing that offer, that was the definition of acceptable.
I know, but I'm saying that the expectation at the time would have been that I would have included it in the offer if that was my intent. And so, and I've had situations where it's just the opposite of that, so I'm just
But if you
saying.
advertise it in MLS,
But that's not true, because we had just the same situation. You said whatever is binding what's in the offer purchase agreement, and the attorney said that as well.
That's right.
MLS does not count.
Right, I mean,
You've got to put it in.
I don't wanna say it doesn't count, but I'm saying that it's gonna be a hard case for that buyer. It's gonna be a hard case for that seller if it goes to arbitration or litigation. You told me that you could pay this with an acceptable offer. Is that not your signature on the acceptance line? That there is the definition of an acceptable.
Well, that's why I bring it up, because it was, the intent was if, that they would pay it if the entire offer encompassed essentially what the additional compensation or the additional expense would be. So, but I think that's a misconception all the time, and I only bring that up because of them saying that you can add this compensation, you can add this total concession that may or may not include buyer broker compensation, which is just another way to skirt around not having.
You can say seller concessions, but that doesn't mean that it's guaranteed, and it also doesn't mean that it's to pay the buyer's agent. That's at the buyer's discretion, what they do with that seller discretion.
Well, I'm just
Seller
wondering,
concession.
if in our listings, if you would encourage us to include that where we can. I'm just saying, because that's what obviously every buyer's agent's gonna be looking for it. And we're all getting emails right now that say, buyer broker compensation encouraged or whatever, buyer agency encouraged or whatever, so.
And just keep in mind, the two things in paragraph 25 in the listing agreement is it says this cannot be confined to buyer's agent's compensation. And it also says may consider seller concessions up to this dollar amount.
Hey, Candy, he also talked about a cooperative compensation agreement.
Yep, sure did, I read that right here.
Yep, I think there could be plenty of broker things like that,
So it wasn't acceptable to do it in the past.
Right.
But now it's gonna be accepted.
And I'm gonna be signing these purchase agreements, not just putting my name on there, so I can become a party to the transaction.
I got one thing to say, I think what's gonna happen now is these people that list properties can split 60-40 with you. When you put in there, say they tell you I'm paying 2.5, you put in there 3, they got it at 6, that's gonna put them to explain to their seller
Right.
why they're not willing to split 50-50.
Good.
And so it puts the burden on them. I've always
But you
thought,
won't know that they have 6%.
you won't know, but if you're putting in 3% and they actually do have it at 6, I've never really had an issue if somebody has it at 5 and I get 2.5. Where I have a problem is they have it at 6 and I get 2.4. I just, I felt like 50-50, is reasonable. And I've always wondered how that explanation went when they list that property. And I said, a lot of times they never explain that to them. They put it in there. But now when you have it in a purchase agreement and say, oh, we need to counter this commission, we're not gonna give them 3, we're gonna give them 2.4, they're selling for why. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think it'll help, but now commission's gonna be a contractual obligation. And this is a contractual obligation of the buyer's agency. Okay, I think
Kevin, if you're putting your name, your signature on the purchase agreement now to ensure that you're a party to that, does that
I'm
now?
not guaranteed that ensures we're a party to it, but
Okay.
it's better than just typing my name.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, does that then put you in a different legal bracket for if something goes wrong with the buyer or seller not?
I think that my
Do you now
statement that it makes you a party to the agreement, I think maybe a little strong. It's still an agreement between seller and buyer. Those are the only two people that can default in the equation. I just think it's gonna be an acknowledgement that you've agreed to pay me this fee. And we're getting into a lot of listing agreement questions, and I know everybody's anxious for that. We just thought it'd be too much to try to have you all sit here for a couple hours to go over the listing part of it too. But that's our biggest change, I think. And you just may have that conversation with sellers, and I'm gonna use the moniker, listen, all the money comes from the buyer. You may think you're paying this commission, but I'm assuming that you're not gonna write me a check, you're gonna take it out of the proceeds you get at closing to pay. That means it comes from the buyer in the very end. And we're gonna talk about disadvantaging your property, but that's all listing stuff. I think we can probably, let's go over transaction in that, whether we're gonna need to role play those, I don't think, because they're so similar. But let's go over some of these highlights and I'll interject some dialogue that might be useful. Tom, are you okay with that?
Yep.
Thanks, guys. Restrooms are over here to the left. All right, the transaction brokerage agreement, probably gonna be more of this going on than we're used to in the past. Just because people may be leery about that whole buyer's agency thing, I don't understand why. If you explain it right, I don't think we're gonna be doing anything but buyer's agency. But I guarantee we're gonna see a lot more of these on the buying side, probably from other agents. All right, once again, you appoint Remax and Gulf Shores, and then your name, and it needs an expiration date. You're still gonna cover covered property. Same thing, nothing changes from the buyer's agency agreement, purchase of real property or solely the following parcels of real property. Now, in my opinion, if we're gonna do solely the following parcels of real property, you're gonna put in pins here. That's gonna allow them to work with somebody else on non-pinned properties that you identified, in my opinion. I mean, if you sign a buyer's agency agreement with me for 425 Wedgewood, you still got that POS?
No.
Sold, baby.
That's the first house I bought. It didn't look like that when I was buying it, I'll tell you that. If you write a buyer's agency agreement or a transaction, simply, if it's a single property, I'd probably stick with transaction. I'm just here to see 425 Wedgewood. I don't think that prevents him from signing a buyer's agency agreement with Chuck for 430 Wedgewood. You know? And Kira recently had somebody, or Nick had somebody where they said, I'm only calling the listing agent. I want no representation whatsoever. And they said, and I think that's gonna happen a lot. That's why listings are gonna be more important to our inventory than ever before. That people are gonna say, I think I see a way to end up paying less if I don't work with a buyer's agent. And we're gonna talk about that in the listing agreement.
I think they're assuming that they don't have to pay an agent, that buyer's side of the agent, even though the listing agent's gonna expect that.
No, the listing agent won't get it unless the listing agent gets a single agent agreement with that buyer.
No, that's not necessarily the case, because you can put in a dollar amount, and it says later in the new listing agreement that if you bring the buyer,
Oh,
and they're not willing to pay, you're still obligated to pay me that whole 5 or 6% that we wrote into the paragraph.
Wait, you're thinking about the Florida listing agreement, I think.
yeah, that's the.
Oh, am I?
I believe so.
Too much going through.
Yeah.
I'll be well versed in it by the time we talk
Yeah.
about it in our next session.
But my understanding is that if the buyer goes directly to the listing agent would be a dual agent if they take on that person, or as a transaction broker, they still have to sign one of these to get paid the
Yep.
buyer fee.
Yep, that's true,
Okay.
yes.
Yep, I didn't mean to contradict that, but I am talking about the Florida form. Buyer's brokerage may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount. So once again, I think this is the very same discussion you're having with the transaction broker, choosing one of these services and covering. Where'd it go?
So we kind of talked about this at one point. If you're going to show D.R. Horton or one of these builders' homes, should you have a completely separate buyer's agency agreement that includes the extra agent incentive that they give you?
Just
What
amend
do you
it,
think?
just amend it like you do a listing agreement. Like that little
because
form.
Every D.R. Horton, every subdivision, they might be offering different compensation.
You just
We
have to
offer
amend it.
different compensation on different houses in each neighborhood,
Yes.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have to have a different one for every single.
Now, we,
I think when that comes about, if you hone in on a D.R. Horton, you would say, look, you know, D.R. Horton's offering concessions not just to you, but they're offering compensation advantages to me. So I'd like to amend our buyer's agency agreement so I can take full advantage of that. You know? But if they don't, you can't take it.
So that says buyer has paid.
Yeah.
If you're talking about the non-refundable retainer. Okay?
I see.
Are we gonna be able to set that up on, key box payload?
No.
That non-refundable amount, and to that point, definitely,
I'm sure.
the right checkout has to be made to Remax Gulf Shores, correct?
Don't you forget it.
Yeah, we
You
just.
still get 5% of the retainer fees? You still get 5% of the retainer fees?
Hell yeah.
It's not in our agreement with you, so everybody.
If it's covered by E&O,
If you got paid for something that requires a license, that check comes through Remax.
Everything's negotiable, Kevin.
Or, Or maybe your new EXP broker would be okay with that.
I'll call Ricky right now.
But go back to that other page, number 3. What I fear think is, number 1 may not be used as much because, as we all know, somebody's gonna come in and they're gonna go, well, we're just getting started. You know, and so does that mean that I pay you something for this weekend and then I gotta pay you something for the next time I come down?
What buyer is gonna pay that?
I know.
Who's gonna do a non-refundable, unless they may treat that
But
as
it
a
is
flat fee
created
and then say,
towards the total. Yeah.
They would be stupid to pay. They would be so stupid to pay.
Donnie, I don't think,
The buyer's agency's
Yes, it does.
worded
It's
different,
still-
isn't it? Does it say buyer has paid?
No.
something got cut off from this. Mid-transaction, right? Because transaction, the last sentence in 3 is broker is directed by buyer to first seek compensation from the seller and or listing agent.
Oh, yeah.
Am I not seeing that here?
Go to the next slide. There it is.
Oh, there it is. My bad.
You just
So
want-
it's still the same way. That you're gonna be going first and foremost to the seller and the listing agent to try to offset this expense to the buyer. When I say offset, just gonna read it right.
Yeah.
Money comes from the damn buyer, guys. Don't fool yourself that the seller's paying for it. It's just gonna, it's mostly gonna be involved in a mortgage situation. You know, we're gonna have Kelly talk about that next week.
Tell the jury,
What's that?
tell the jury that.
Yeah.
Now, if they do choose the retainer, and
Chuck
it
has more
is
experience in
applied
criminal activity than I do, so I don't know how to him.
if they do choose the retainer, back over there, let me see it again.
It's applied to the
And
total.
it's applied towards the compensation.
Total compensation.
And then, if we get the purchase agreement and it's agreed upon, and is there a difference there,
You have to give me some numbers. I'm not following it correctly.
I'm trying to work this
I
through.
mean, you can mark more
If they
than
say
one
they're gonna pay you
box.
$1,000 now, and then you end up getting an agreement that says that the seller is gonna pay $500. I'm just using numbers like that. So then,
You reimburse it to the buyer?
do we reimburse that $500? Or that's still, they pay
No, the buyer
$500?
just gets.
Donnie's right. Just because you check box 1 doesn't mean you're not also checking box 2. Right now, you're gonna give me $500 to show you around, and 2.5% if we find a property that works for you, and the $500 you pay now will count towards that 2.5.
Deduct
Yes.
2.5.
Okay.
Are you with me? Fee is credited towards the total compensation. Once again, this is huge. That's where we're getting the money first. You know, we talked about, this is not gonna accomplish what these alleged plaintiffs wanted to accomplish. Because we're not gonna be filtering out properties based on what the seller concession is, but our buyers damn sure are. Especially those getting a mortgage. In my opinion, the buyers are gonna say, okay, I really like that house, what are they offering? We're not offering any, means I gotta pay it? Yes, ma'am.
And what's her name from B-Car said they can't do that, but they're gonna do it. They're gonna say that.
No, they said we can't do that.
Okay.
They can say whatever they want.
Well, I think what the problem is when you try to negotiate these contracts and the seller says, I'm not gonna give you 3%, but I'll give you a flat fee of $1,500 on what would ordinarily be a $7,000 or $8,000 commission, and you gotta look at that buyer and be their fiduciary and try to negotiate your income at the same
right,
time.
right.
I don't understand how that's gonna work.
It's just as counterproductive as negotiating for them a lower price, which means a lower fee to you. It's not exactly the same, but I'm saying that you have a fiduciary duty to that buyer, but then you're trying to cut your fee as low as you can to get them,
And we do that, we do
Every
it all
day.
the time, all the
and
time.
always will.
But I don't know how to answer, I don't know how to have that argument,
The
Kevin.
only difference is you're having to do it up front now.
You're doing it up front, and
Then
then,
you have to,
but Candy's saying the counteroffer from the seller, she puts in 3% seller
I mean, the
concession.
fact that there's a flat fee in the purchase agreement is ridiculous, in my opinion. When you say in here that the intent is to go first to the seller, which I think is great that it's in here, but then it's just, I think it's very counterproductive,
And I think it's gonna affect luxury listings more than anything else.
for sure.
Because they look, 25 grand is plenty to have you guys show me around, look at some $3 million houses.
You know?
And that's,
And I'm gonna be, and I'm gonna be okay with that, Kevin, but what I'm not okay with is on a property that, you know, I mean, that you actually end up losing money on, and how can you tell a buyer that you're not willing to help them? I don't know how.
Well, same discussion we had in team meeting, Kara, says how can you tell a buyer you won't work with them if they're not willing to pay any, buyer's agent
No, it's a
compensation?
calculation thing, and I think we can have this conversation all day long. It's when we get to the purchase agreement that's gonna be challenging.
Well, I don't doubt that for a minute, and sellers are gonna get wise. All right, they've already got a buyer who's hooked on my house. They're asking for 3. Are they gonna frog and walk if I say 2? Or if I say $5 grand, here's $5 grand? Kiss my
Right, and
ass?
then I see a lot of ethics issues coming up.
So really quick,
It's gonna be a very awkward conversation.
if they, back to the single agency agreement, if they say, no, I'm not paying you commission, and they have you put in there 0, and then we go to try to negotiate commission for the purchase agreement, that's when we do the listing, that's when we do the amendment to the single agency agreement, so that you can include some sort of commission, or you just go in there, like,
They're not getting in my truck.
Yeah.
That's what I was told.
This was a discussion of my worth, and you determined my worth was 0.
Good luck.
Let me have you talk to Jason.
but what,
brand new.
seriously, what if they say, well,
Let me have you talk to him.
Jace. What if they?
I'm not going out the damn door if they say I'm not willing to pay you any commission. You get it from the seller.
How would you say that, though, to a buyer?
And we're just not made for each other.
This is just not gonna work.
Hold up, y'all. Rebecca's got a comment?
I was just saying, I feel like that makes you look like all you care about is
It's
your
your money.
commission.
I know.
And you don't care about them, you don't have their best interest at heart.
But you're not their agent.
I certainly don't have your best
works
interest
for
at
free.
any means. If they're not willing to pay you a dime, I mean, what are they thinking? I'm here for free, I am here for me, Rebecca, I'm here for my kids. Good Lord, I finally have my 7th one graduating from college, I got one more, I need some Jack, I need some food. But, I hear what you're saying, but you're telling me somebody says 0, I'm not willing to pay you anything for being my buyer's agent. You're gonna.
Get it from the seller.
I don't have it.
I'll get the buyer.
One at a time, y'all. I'm sorry?
I would wanna get it from the seller, and then they say, well, you show me properties, we can get it from the seller, and I would do that.
And so, yeah, all the way up to 0%. The
Yeah.
seller can pay me 0% because I can't take more compensation than you're willing to pay me.
But you're doing
And
amendment
they're doing an amendment.
down the road.
I think it's just,
That's gonna be y'all's personal, you know.
Yeah, I'm not sitting here telling you that don't put them in your car. I'm telling you I'm not gonna put them in my car.
I don't think that's gonna be a difficult conversation at all. I think the conversation is, this is about calculations and numbers, and we're gonna have a lot of discussion about it with every listing that we look at. And I think that's how you handle that, but I think the purchase agreement is gonna be the real problem. You know, that's where I think you have to look yourself in the mirror and wonder if you're, helping somebody in, for the purposes of which we were hired for.
Particularly if you get a weird.
Well, you're
listing
right,
agent on
and
the
the
other side.
problem's gonna be, is when you go to somebody and you put 3% in there, and they come back and counter and said, we're willing to do it for 1%. And that buyer says, well, let's go, and you say, well, I'm not willing to do it at 1%.
It's a cluster.
It's a problem.
It's literally
Not getting
like
I tell you, what's gonna happen is the buyers are gonna ask you about every listing, what seller concession are they offering?
And are you gonna be happy with that?
And are you really gonna know until you have a purchase agreement? Because
That's
they're
right.
all gonna be honest with you.
We know what they may consider. Dominique's point's valid, just because the listing agreement says 3, it said may consider 3.
That's right.
It's gonna happen, you're gonna do a broker-to-broker agreements, sellers willing to pay.
There is that, what we were just talking, was that Florida,
Florida
Candy?
has that.
Maybe we could do one of those here.
Yeah, we can still do that in Alabama, you can always do that. When people come to me and say this Eastern Shore agent is only gonna pay me 2.4, but they say they're willing to split it, I said, we'll get that right. Have an agreement with them. We agree.
Compensation disclosure statement. It's a compensation disclosure.
That's the Alabama one, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one I did.
oh, okay.
That,
Just for-
but that doesn't cover numbers.
Yeah, that's just a
That's just a disclosure. All
That's a fire signature.
right, guys, let's finish this form. Same thing, you're gonna do paragraph 4 and 5, you're gonna talk about the properties they're looking for. We're not gonna discriminate based on the 7 protected classes. Buyer acknowledges they're not under current representation. Once again, you don't have an agreement with somebody else.
For the same property.
if you did a specific transaction brokerage.
So, but if a buyer comes in town and say, okay, I'm gonna look, they don't know about Golden County. I sign an agreement with you for Orange Beach, and I sign another one for Gulf Shores.
If you took the option of identifying specific properties.
But that's gonna happen whenever they come in town, you have the conversation. And then she's gonna sit with you, like, let's take the Ashley, what do you call it, scenario.
Doesn't it, it says
She comes and sits
term
with you
or,
and she
or
says-
property.
Yeah, it says term.
So there's term, as long as you have your term.
And keep in mind, you know, BR said this term
No,
may be a
but
day.
then you come to find out, let's say, okay, she sits down with you, she says, okay, oh, by the way, I'm gonna see other properties in Orange Beach with somebody else. How do you handle this? You didn't know.
Mine says Baldwin County.
Let's say I'm well versed in Orange Beach.
Everything.
I'm
Do you
gonna, mine's gonna say
take them
10%, it's gonna say 10%, and I'll take it.
I'm sorry?
I'll
Do
give
you
it
take
just
them
to-
away from that
But I'm
age?
putting 10% just in case.
Take them away from that age.
First time in town, the same scenario you had with Ashley.
Cause you can lower it.
And she tells you, hey, you know,
Yeah.
when you ask her, do you have representation? She's like, yes, by the way, I'm gonna look at other properties in Orange Beach with Vicky Carew.
Then you've got a conscious decision to make. I'm not gonna tell any of you to show or not show property to people based on certain circumstances. You are independent contractors. I don't tell you what to charge, and I don't tell you who to show and who not to show. When you ask me these questions, I'm gonna tell you how I think I'm gonna handle it. Now, if it goes poorly, maybe I'll be changing my philosophy.
Kevin, I have a dumb question, but,
We try to save those to the end. Go ahead.
well, I'm just trying to think about logistically, so we can't show a person a single property until we have this agency agreement in place, right? So we're gonna do that. I just lost my train of thought.
Right. You're right, that was a dumb question.
Where was the question? There is also a touring agreement.
In
Yes.
Florida.
That's Florida also.
Florida's got
Florida,
touring.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, guys, not currently in a relationship. Brokerage services, they've acknowledged that that you can be candidates. Okay, signatures. Limited consensual is gonna be the same way. It hasn't changed one iota, has it?
They didn't come out and do limited consensual.
Keep in mind, the limited consensual is signed by both the seller and the buyer, so it's another place for you to reiterate where the money's coming from. And you know, I've always said in the past, all the money's coming from the seller. That's gonna change in this situation. Because you're gonna disclose where the money's coming from if you're showing another remaster Gulf, if you're writing a contract with another remaster Gulf Shores. Restrooms are on the left.
So Kevin, if we do negotiate the broker compensation from the seller, will we need to do an amendment then to the buyer agency agreement and potentially the limited consensual dual agency?
If it's less or more or equal. Your buyer's agency
Yes,
agreement
Peter,
already,
I mean, if you put in,
your buyer's agency agreement already says that our first resource is gonna be the seller and the listing agent.
yeah.
I didn't even look at that
I think
again.
only if it's different. If
That's the
it's-
paragraph
if
I had
it's-
the ellipses.
That's what I'm saying, so it's
Historical.
3%, oh, you're saying if it's less than what's listed in here?
If you did a buyer agreement for 2.5, but the seller ends up paying 3, then you need a modification.
But you also need it if it's 2, and you're not gonna seek that 0.5% from the buyer.
That's what I'm talking about.
Let's just say that you have 2.5 in
That's what I'm
there.
talking about.
If you have 2.5 in your buyer's agency, and you negotiate 2 with the seller, if nothing changes, that buyer is obligated to you for that other 0.5%.
Right, so we will need an amendment on both of those documents.
So will we
If
have
they
that
offer,
sensible?
if they offer 3, then you need an amendment to say, will you let me take 3 now, since we're getting it from the selling side?
Or I
And if
wrote
it's the same
3.
amount, then you have nothing to do,
Right.
anything to do.
Right, but if we agreed on 3 and I'm only gonna get 2.5%, then I'm gonna release you of your obligation for the extra 0.5% required
Yes.
by an addendum.
Otherwise, the buyer would be.
That's what I'll be doing, and that's why I'm gonna shoot for a higher number in the buyer's agency. Look, if it's less than that, we'll talk about it. Okay,
Sounds like
we're not
we
gonna
put
sign anything you're not
3.5%
comfortable
in
with.
there.
But right now, if we put in 2, I can't accept 2.5 or 3 from anybody, and it's gonna be hard to get that, in my opinion, post facto, unless we write it into there.
So are we gonna have that form?
Which,
Have a modification form.
the modification to the buyer's agency form, yes ma'am.
Okay.
What do we got here, Dee?
Do these forms now need to go to the title company so that they can put it on the closing statement and enforce, and are we still gonna be paid the same way from,
We're gonna reiterate anything we do in the purchase agreement. And of course, you're giving the purchase agreement to the title company.
Okay,
I would not accept anything, if they're offering 2.5% concession, your buyer's agency says 2.5, I'm still writing that some buck into the contract. Rebecca?
And what's the other line for, what would you put on other?
If you knew you were gonna ride on 123 Main Street and D.R. Horton was giving you a $5,000 bonus.
But this is before you pick a property, I mean,
Well, I'm just saying, if you knew, but
there could be, I'm gonna give you my Range Rover. I'll let you stay in this condo 3 weeks a year for the rest of your life.
Kevin, I remembered my dumb question. So on the, do we have to keep or should we keep a record of the properties we've shown these folks?
Oh, hell yeah.
I would.
No, I'm just saying, at some point, at what point, 'cause, with all the paperwork, once we get a deal done, I'm usually like scrap, I throw out whatever we don't need, but I'm just thinking about like for whether we get paid, we don't get, whether we get a deal done or not. For the purposes of the real estate commission, are they gonna come back and say, well, we need to see your buyer broker agency agreement and we need to know the properties that you showed them? How would they even, I'm just saying, how would they know that we even showed them a property period that would require the use of the document?
I don't think the real
If
estate.
you went under
commission-
you're talking about if you went under contract?
No, I'm talking about if you don't go under contract.
If you don't go under contract, I would have a list, and I'd even have the buyer sign at the end.
Okay.
We weren't able to find anything, but I need you to acknowledge that. I
I'm just
should-
saying, just so that we don't get into, I'm thinking about the liability on our end. That, you know, if you got audited, for example, and, I don't know how any of that's gonna work, or, you know.
You can print like your showing term.
It's no different to today. I mean,
If they said the same thing about recap, I guess.
Okay.
you may have a input on the dumb question? This wasn't dumb, and the other one was dumb. I'm just teasing.
That was the part I couldn't remember.
I'm just teasing. All right, guys, Susan just brought up this form, compensation disclosures. This is, what they are recommending, signed before August 17th, and do not already include this disclosure. You need to provide a disclosure that simply says, dated blank in reference to your listing blank, as a result of the National Association of Realtors proposed settlement agreement, the following disclosure is required. Notice to buyer, notice to seller. I'm gonna recommend that you go back and do a new buyer's agency with people, or at least amend it to include the compensation discussion and this disclosure. I don't know, I had a conversation with Jennifer yesterday, via email back and forth. I don't get it. Why, if you have a buyer's agency that was signed before August 17th and does not have any reference to buyer's agent compensation, how just adding this, by the way, buyer's agent compensation is fully negotiable and not set by law. I don't know how that protects you with the deal you write after August 17th, except you're gonna put it into the contract. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I mean,
I think if you have existing buyer agencies for people that are not already under contract, that you should present a new buyer agency to them.
that's gonna be a tough conversation
It
too.
is, but
August 16th, I'm working for you for whatever the seller will pay me. August 18th, I need you to sign that you're gonna pay me. It's gonna be an awkward ass conversation too.
Well, the end of the terms of those contracts should dictate, should go beyond the August 17th, it seems to me. They should. None of this seems like it should.
Which contract are you talking about?
Let's say you had an agreement, and you put, it's good for 6 months, it's gonna end up in
How about
December.
a buyer's agency agreement?
Yeah, December, well.
But it has no reference to compensation.
But yeah, you're right, buyer's agency is different. If a listing agreement, this is what I asked the other day, a listing agreement has a specific percentage of compensation, those are good.
Yes, I think that for the listings, which again, we'll talk about on Monday, but on listings, just the disclosure will be, sufficient. And I have one of those in Dotloop.
This is what Jennifer sent us saying, you need to amend it. If you have a listing agreement before, all you need to do is provide the compensation disclosure, which is just donkey. It says the buyer's agent is still negotiable and not set by law.
And know that all these forms are not ready in Dotloop to be they have not all been templated. Purchase agreement, the listing agreement, we have to wait for Dotloop to do those. I don't have the ability to do that. Certain things like free CAD, buyer's agency, transaction, those I have ready in .loop, just because they're easy, but the purchase agreement and stuff like that, we're waiting, so.
But you can go to,
Everybody's
to the board.
Yes, if
and
you
can download them on
download
their
the
phone
forms from
bills.
Baldwin Realtors on your computer, they are fillable, and then you just have to upload them into .loop, so just know that all of them are not.
Did everybody follow that?
Yeah.
Tim shaking his head from here, Ralph from here.
There's too many people, too many states, too many, associations that have sent them forms to be templated, so they have a backlog.
But Baldwin Realtors has sent them for them to be done.
Yes, yes.
So what happens if you download the Baldwin form right now?
You can fill it in on your computer and then upload it into your loop.
How is that
Fill the
different?
PDF.
You're still gonna have to, how is that different than once .loop does their thing?
In .loop, you just bring it into your loop and fill it in. It's just an extra step, it's not that big of a deal.
For you, not for me, so anyway.
You might have trouble with it.
Busy keeping.
For existing buyer agency agreement prior to 8/16, have your clients execute the new form.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that it?
Yep.
It's a lot, y'all. Honesty and transparency is the answer to everything. If somebody's not sure, don't shove it down their throat, say, let's go back over it. You know, expect it to take longer, expect your listing appointments to take longer, definitely expect, don't have people show up here at 9:45 if your first showing's at 10 o'clock. They need to be here at 9:15 so we can go over this and get comfortable and sign these documents and get them copies. It's the law. This is not a good suggestion, this is the new law, and we have to do this.
So when Kira takes someone out without getting these documents signed, are they coming after, and NAR or Baldwin Realtors finds out that she did that? Are they coming after her to find her and you, or
Probably.
just?
There's very little occurrence where they only come over to after the agent and not the broker too.
Okay.
I mean, but we're not gonna do that.
Right.
I haven't done it for 25 years, I don't do that. So nothing's different except we're gonna talk about buyer's agency compensation.
I just put it on Kira.
Why you picking up here?
Well, it wasn't gonna be her, it was gonna be John Rex, but he left.
Not
Well,
Carol.
thanks for putting me along with him.
Anybody else? Taking a lot of your time.
Here, I got a question.
Who has a question?
Here, I'm gonna go show with
So
somebody.
Candy didn't need to hear it. Tell me your question.
No, you said lesser service for a transaction versus a limited consensual. How is it a lesser service?
Between transaction and,
Yeah, limited consensual.
no, I didn't say that. I said between buyer's agency.
When you were going through it and then you started saying, if we see a property at Green Mountain Gulf Shores, I will transition into a
Limited consent.
Because it's a transaction brokerage, if you choose that, it's a lesser service than a limited consensual. I wrote about it.
They're so incredibly close. They always have been.
Exactly, so like,
John, do you agree that limited consensual versus transaction is so close when you're on the buying side?
I do.
But, I mean, there's still a level.
there's no loyalty, right?
No, there's loyalty, just up until the point where it contradicts with the
If they agree
seller.
upon to give up the loyalty,
I'm sorry?
No confidentiality.
Well, you do.
no
Look
confidentiality.
at that.
It's all confidential.
It's
Yeah.
all confidential.
Yeah.
But I think that's the difference. You are loyal to that buyer up until the point it contradicts.
So
Your
you're giving
obligation
up,
to the
as a
seller.
buyer, I'm giving up the loyalty.
No, you're understanding that I'm not gonna be telling you what to offer. I can argue with all you.
Negotiation.
What's that?
Same thing as a transaction broker.
I told you, they're extremely close, but you have a loyalty to the buyer during the whole buyer's agency process and the limited consensual process up until the time it contradicts. And John, you're welcome to step in here, because I'm making a
No,
mess
I
of
guess
this.
where I'm going with this is when she, let's say she chooses not to have a buyer agency agreement with you, but chooses to be like, okay, transaction broker. And then you keep pushing, it's better to get single agent. And then you're like, okay, well, by the way, this is a Remax I've got short, so I'm gonna push towards limited. If she's a savvy buyer and then she knows the difference between the limited and transaction, why not to do it?
You can't be a limited consensual dual agent without having a buyer's agency in place first, not a transaction broker.
If they agree upon, but if one of them says no,
Then your transaction for that.
if they agree again.
If they agree again. I mean, your transaction broker by default, but you can't go out of that, you can't go show them any property without having either a single agency, buyer's agency agreement, or a transaction
Or
broker
a joint.
signed and in place. You can't show them property by law unless they sign a transaction brokerage agreement or a buyer's agency agreement.
which in their head, the transaction is less money to pay than a buyer's agent, or is it up to us?
Doesn't how you
You
present
heard Kevin, I
it.
mean, he told me what he's recommended, what his business model.
No,
Yeah,
I did.
but if they're transaction, you can't go straight to limited consensual, John?
Correct.
That hasn't changed, I'm not sure it's right.
It's in the form, isn't it?
It's in the buyer's agency.
No, it's in the limited consensual,
Yeah.
it's understood that you already represent the buyer, yes ma'am. That's why when people turn in limited consensual agreements to me and don't have a buyer's agency in place, we're like, whoa, you can't skip that step. You have to create that buyer's agency form first. John, go ahead.
We're all accustomed to being agents of our clients. And so it's kind of second nature for us. The thing we need to be really careful about is if we do end up being a transaction broker, if you accidentally give agency level service to a person who's a transaction broker and the deal goes sideways, that's considered fraud, because you're behaving like an agent, but you're not one.
It gives you all the risk and none of the reward, none of the protection.
Right.
I tell people that, if I'm a transaction broker for you, they start going into my opinion of this property
Right, exactly.
and things of that nature, you gotta say, look, you know, you didn't wanna do a buyer's agency with me, and that's the kind of thing that I could have lent you that as a buyer's agent, but right now, we're transactions, so I can tell you the printed facts, I can show you around, I can give you all the comps, but if you wanna get into what do I think of this, then I'm becoming an implied agent
But then
with
you
all the
can't-
risk and no reward.
You can't do that if you're in a limited consensual, right? You cannot give your opinion on price or anything, or negotiations, you just have to present the facts. So how is it different?
I think what you're saying, it's different if you start out as a buyer's agent, and
Right.
you're working with them, and you tell them your opinion, and you're giving them the facts, and you show
Suddenly
the
it's
facts.
tough.
If you become a limited dual, now you have to say, I can't do all those things, I have to do
But I
similar.
still wanna get paid for it, the same amount.
When it comes to that, and I'm ready, I've been their buyer's agent, and we're gonna write on somebody's listing in this room, I tell them, remember, we talk about limited consensual dual agent, I can give you everything, here's what I would wanna know if I was making an offer. I would wanna know what is sold in that neighborhood, I would wanna know what else is available in the neighborhood, I wanna know how long this has been on the market, and maybe where they started. I can provide you all that information, it's just when it comes down to it, and I ask you, what are we offering? I can't say, I would offer this.
But you could if you're my agent, correct?
Not if it's a Remax and Gulf Shore property.
I'm asking as a buyer.
A buyer's
If you
agent,
were my,
yes.
strictly my single agent.
Absolutely.
Then you could have answered that.
Yeah.
So why would I pay you the 3%? Can I pay you less?
I see what she's trying.
This is after you've honed in on a Remax and Gulf
We
Shore
already
listing?
have an agreement in place, we have a limited concession because I want Chuck's
I see what you said.
listing. Why would I pay you the same amount of money when all you do is presenting me facts, the internet has?
Mhm.
So can you do it 1.5 versus 3?
When you become a limited.
Mhm.
When you become
Pay
a,
less.
same as in a seller's shoe. Now it's in-house. All it's in-house. It's just a.
There's no-
I hear your question.
We gotta do it
We're
right.
gonna reiterate it in the purchase agreement, what we're gonna expect of the seller.
So how do you tell me as a buyer, what are you telling me? Can you do the 1.5?
But this, most of the time, the sellers pay.
You're right.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna change.
So that doesn't come into play, if the buyer